Hello, everybody. Welcome to my weird and wonderful world. And the idea for this video came about as a kind of a response to, first of all, Glenn Calloway from the basement uh, getting bored about the Beatles. And I want to start this message about, well, I want to talk about my personal favorite first, and a few examples I have laying around here about my impression of how music came about for me and my little history with music. But you'll see the purpose of this once I get to it, once I start explaining. I'm just kind of looking over at what I'm about to present here. But yeah, it's talking about when you first hear an album and how how you first get introduced to it. Okay. First, I'll start with that response to Glenn Calloway's, and it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. When it comes to the Beatles, okay, I understand those out there, like, and it takes, like, it's different. How Larry Graves, is not bored of the Beatles. He can still listen to the Beatles with fresh ears and a continuous appreciation for them. And again, Glenn doesn't say that he dislikes the Beatles. He didn't say that they're not great, and he still will acknowledge that they're one of the best bands out there, and but they're not necessarily now his favorite because he outgrew them. He got bored of them. He probably played them way more often than Larry did probably in back in the day. Some people, when they get an obsession, they can go hard into the obsession. But for me, okay, and bringing it back to my point of view, and I don't blame Glenn, and not to take anything away from that, I completely understand because there is so much other music out there. Like that's why I'm putting the brakes on listening to any Tool or anything like that right now for the moment, because there's so much other things I want to listen to. I still want to listen to more Sparks. I still want to listen to more King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. From my first time with the Beatles and that, like most often, okay, well, basically the only reason I'm getting into Beatles as I am now is mainly because of Larry Graves. I was always aware of the Beatles as listening to them on the radio and everything, but that was always whatever I listen to on the radio. 85% of it is passive. I'm just passively listening to it. I don't I'm an album guy. I like listening to full albums. It's only when I really listen to a full album and get the context of where that song places in an album do you actually get the form of a better understanding of what makes the song special or not. Hearing it on the radio singled out as a single and out of context of the rest of the album, no, it's a different experience for me. I don't like. I mean, I mean, that's what entices you into a song. And like, for example, when Much Music came around, okay, and I first heard KMFDM, like when I first heard Drug Against War, and I saw that video, and just that one video made me a huge fan. Seeing a 30-second commercial about an oncoming album, and then seeing the video that commercial was, showcasing, it made me buy that album and love it. And so, how a person discovers music and their history with that music there on in determines, that's why music is so subjective. That's why music, because you are not in another person's head. You are not in another person's, understanding of how they came to discover music. And for me, getting all these Beatles albums in a short period, just in a short period, this was in a year. Within a year that I had gotten pretty much all of these, so, and I'm pretty happy with all this. I'm like, I love that I have the Beatles, and I've been meaning to try to make time to listen to more of this because I actually do like it, and I know I won't be getting bored of it anytime soon. Not really, because there's so much for me to still pick pick apart, and I love that. I love that stuff. And so let's start with my little history of music. For me, the first spark of my love for music, what cemented it and made it, such an integral part of my life is this album. And I've spoken about this many times, and I still want to put a better case on it. This is a better case. That Yeah, when my uncle Frankie brought this over and played this for the first time. Now I had other little music. I had this 45 that had how much is that doggy in the window, and the that was my real kind of introduction. This was always in the mix though. That was always there. This was pre Kiss, okay? But this was just one of those weird oddities kind of thing that you know I because at the time, even way back a kid, before you understood what music really was about, I was on the fence whether to call this music or not because it was just so different than any of the other commercial pop stuff or even the avant-garde stuff in that, like even like Kiss or whatever, or even like the Led Zeppelins and the and the Black Sabbath. I still remember hearing that and liking that as a young kid. That was always good stuff for me. But this was always the oddity, and now this here is one of the few albums in my life, okay, that I do not remember the first time hearing it. I don't remember the first time hearing this, and like that memory is very very vague and fuzzy. Like I don't know. No, I don't rightfully remember the first time hearing this, but I remember the first time hearing this and how this influenced me. I mean, the whole thing was good, but especially when you get to Black Diamond and the way that bass started like getting lower and lower and lower, it transcends everything. But then, was I getting bored of Kiss? No, no, not necessarily. I mean, I loved all the albums that came after it, all the way up to Creatures of the Night. I even had a soft spot for The Elder too. As disappointing as that album sort of kind of really was. I really have grown to love it now for what it is. But I was at the time disillusioned by Kiss because they took off their makeup and they changed their sound. And even though I still love it, I still want to get those albums, those 80s albums where they just after they took off their makeup, everything from like Crazy Crazy Nights to um, the Made in the Shade. What's that one? Something in the Shade. Or yeah, I want to get all those other albums. Lick It Up, Animalize, absolutely, and so on and so forth. And so, but my point is, I was looking for a new band, and that's why in 1985, when a childhood friend, a neighbor down the street, hanging out at his place, and he brings that out for the first time, and I hear that for the first time on cassette, on like a crappy little cassette player radio, but it still was enough that I was like, whoa, because it had a certain energy and a certain angst, and it made more of a statement than Kiss ever did. It was like finally some serious music that really rips. It has an intensity and a fury that gravitated me. And then from there, okay, remember not and Justice for All hasn't come out yet. I just know this, and then I went back and heard the first two albums, blown away, and loving Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All just as much, and then remembering when then here and then because then hearing about what happened to Cliff Burton. They get a new bass player. Uh, they have a video for one. I'm loving it. Some people were disappointed, okay, but I thought no. I mean, it had to be what it had to be. And it couldn't be anything more than what it was because they were missing the key member of their troop now. They don't have the you know the base. They don't have their base, which is the foundation of their music, and that's why they would never be the same again after these three albums. But I so embraced and Justice for All. And I still remember the first time hearing that. First time. This is what this episode is about. And 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 of course in contrast to other people's first times, like for this, for example, the first time that Larry Graves was became aware of this band, to the between and the first time I became aware of this band, Sparks. And this is the first time I heard this album, okay, as compared to the first time Larry Graves heard this album. He actually, it's his second favorite band now, and he actually threw this in the garbage. He threw it in the garbage, and then after he took it out and got around to playing it again, and then he loved it, and then and yeah, me, I pretty much liked it instantly the first time I heard the whole thing. I guess me being way late to the game and listening to this with a different, fresh ear of all, I mean, being the age that he was at, okay, when probably that the first time he heard this, compared to the age that I am, like in my 50s, the first time I heard that, it makes such a difference. It makes such a, huge difference. I had a history of oddball music that I was better equipped to have a certain judgment that Larry Graves, wouldn't have had at the time. Thus, the initial rejection of the album, which I embraced because I, you know, I had Devo to listen to. Devo came after this, and some of the other stuff from Sparks was inspired. I think maybe I don't know who inspired who, but there's a couple, like you listen to "Angst in My Pants," and that is so sounds so much like Devo in the best way without being Devo. So I remember the first time I heard "Angst in My Pants" and how that wowed me, or the first time hearing "Number One in Heaven." Yeah, it blew me away. Um, the first time hearing, okay, another quick example. And the first time hearing, where is it here? Right here, the boy with the Arab strap. And again, it was for almost a good 5, 6 years. Okay, it was only just with the CD, just with the CD. I had no idea what the names of the songs were even really. It was only once I was hanging out with a buddy who had access to LimeWire at the time, okay, a few years later, and he was able to I was able to hear other albums and that, and then I was addicted. From that point on, when I was able to, for the first time, hear, and then because the next album I heard after that, like many years later, and then I finally had a chance to see what that cover looked like. I had no idea for a good 5, 6 years. I had no idea what that cover looked like. Okay, and trying to imagine what the band members look like, and then I must have been only like another 4 or 5 years later, okay, once I came back from Montreal to Moncton and had access to the internet, that I looked them up and seen what the singers, what they looked like, you know, that like, yeah, okay, it's cool. It was not at all what I was imagining, not at all, you know. So yeah, I had a completely different image in my mind of what they look like. So yeah, but it's still it made me a fan that I got all that. That's all Bell Sebastian stuff that I ended up getting, because I fell in love with the band. Um, the first time I the first time I heard this, and this was introduced to me through another video where they were talking about microtonal tuning. Okay, and this was the band that they were using as an example to explain it. And they were and it was mostly with the song Rattlesnake, which is the first song on the album. But then it's like, so I went and you can find this on YouTube. I wasn't on Spotify at the time, but I found it on YouTube, listening to the entire album and still remembering the first time hearing it, and it blew my mind. Especially once it got to that peak of yeah, when it got to the peak of nuclear fusion, the second to last song, because the last song is sort of it's called Flying Microtonal Banana, and it's basically just kind of a cool instrumental to as an outro. I find the official last song on there is Nuclear Fusion, but this song blew me away. That 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 when I started looking into them, and then I heard that about that for the first time, and the concept behind that, it blew my mind. And now this is my second favorite album of all time, right next to my well, I might as well get back to it right now. Next to my favorite album of all time, which is Lateralis. And still, I will never forget the first time hearing that, where I was, how like the whole introduction, my whole introduction to even how I became aware. I've told that story many times, but I'm not going to go into that story now. You can go into my playlist and check out my playlist for my Tool Talks, and I have told the story at least 3 times about my introduction to this album. It's supernatural. It is 100% supernatural, but it all started for when the first time I heard that, when it was only that in 1992, when it was only Opiate, and how this blew my mind. Never would I imagine where they would go. And then not even a year later, there was this, okay, and then that was like, yeah, not quite the same as it was the perfect progression of their sound. It was like yeah, it's funny how it's the same, but yet so different than Opiate, because it's a full album. It's just starting to get a little bit more proggy, as this is more kind of grungy, almost like a grungy metal type of sound, but in a great way. This got just it's still grungy, okay, but it got just slightly more progressive. And then this started really getting more experimental with Anima, and and then they had those little interludes between some of the songs, and it's a little bit more of a challenging listen, but it is a little bit more of a rewarding listen. But then when Lateralis came out, because it's that anticipation also. It was 5 years that I was not hearing anything from Tool, and then all of a sudden I'm walking down the street, and no, I'm not going to get into the story because that'll be another 20 minutes. But yeah, and then it kind of sort of plateaued with the later two, with 10,000 Days and Fear and Inoculum. They still, like, for me, that was will still be the kind of the pinnacle. I'm still waiting for them to wow me more than this did. If they can do something, and if they can make another album that instantly becomes my favorite album of all time, that would blow my mind. I don't think they can. I don't think they could. I don't think they can match that for me. I think that's it. Um, the last thing I told my Rush story. I talked about the Beatles. I talked about Kiss and some. Okay, last thing I want to talk about, because when it comes to your sources of learning about music and everything, being a big fan of Scott Lade and the Prague Corner, of course, and again bringing this up that my last example, that my full actual true listen, when I put this in my CD player, for I had sampled it a little bit here and there. Okay, I was always intrigued by the cover. It was the cover that was the big attractor for me. It was the thing that really made me want to get this, is because I love that cover. I really love that cover. I knew the music was good, but it's only when I really listened to that for the first time where I was, did I make a mistake? Do I really like this, or can I? 'Cause, oh, that kind of weirded me out. How my interpretation of it was just not as strong as I was hoping. But also knowing in the back of my time, that first time actually listening to it in its entirety, that it was going to take a little bit more of an open mind and a couple of more real, like, deeper listens before to really appreciate it, because there is a lot to appreciate here. And it's a lesson to me personally that I need to get over certain hang-ups I have about music, that if it sounds a certain way, that that it, that for some reason it might be a turn off to them. But no, no, but there is a genius behind that album that I am detecting, that I am now hearing. All right, that's it for me. That's all I kind of want to talk about. Is that when my final thoughts is that when you're thinking about other people's taste in music, you gotta put in perspective that how they first heard an album and their personal history with that artist, and then and whether you, like, just say, like, with Beatles fans, okay. Once you discovered the Beatles, okay, and you're listening to the Beatles, and then you're hearing other bands after the Beatles that have different styles, and using the influence that they had from the Beatles to make great music that's going to change your perception. Every time get introduced to a new, different type of band that changes your perspective of music, it also changes the perspective of music you used to listen to. Getting introduced to Metallica completely changed the way I looked at Kiss. You know, the way I got introduced and listen to Tool changes the way I listen to Kiss and Metallica and other bands that came before it. It really does change everything. So we cannot all live the same lives. So when it comes to other people's taste in music, you have to be understanding, and you cannot be critical. You're you have no you have no right to judge and criticize other people's taste in music. You don't know their history. You don't know how they lived. That's all I'm saying. That's what makes music wonderful. Everybody can find their music that makes them happy, and they can find other people to share that music with. You don't have to be critical and put down other people's taste in music. Okay, I'm done, because I don't want to start ranting about that. But that is kind of what I was getting at with this episode. If you are watching this for the first time and you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, or you've been watching me and haven't subscribed, please do, because I will greatly appreciate it and love you forever. Don't be afraid of that like button. And I am consciously trying to go and respond to everybody's comments, like even going back and looking for those hidden comments that I know YouTube does on me and other people. There is ways to bringing them out and finding those hidden comments. So I'm gonna up my effort in doing that. So okay, everybody, have a great day, evening, morning, night. Be safe. Take care. I will see you on the flip side, and peace, everybody. I did that backwards, but peace, everybody.